let's flip this over to Florida's perspective now.
Right.
So they get probably the best 24-year-old player in the league right now in Matthew Tkachuk.
Yes, they do.
Now, we said a couple of minutes back that, yes, they did give up an absolute shit ton from a value perspective. And there is a chance that this trade majorly backfires for the Panthers. Because say that this was an anomaly of a year, hypothetically, for Tkachuk. His career averages were nowhere near this heading into this season, as I type in Tkachuk on Cap Friendly.
Yeah, he definitely struggled in the playoffs, took a lot of flack from Flames fans.
Then again, so did most of the Flames. Okay, so this was the first season that Matthew Tkachuk hit a point per game. And the closest he got was, since we're staying in 5-year spans, the season before COVID, 77 points in 80 games. Then he had a little bit of a drop off, but not by much the following year in the first COVID shortened season. And then 43 points in 56 games the second COVID shortened season. So with that alone, like I said, this trade does have the potential to backfire for Florida in a pretty massive way. Because let's say Tkachuk does settle into that, I was going to say 75 to 80, but let's go 75 to 80, 85-ish range. If he does fall into that as his career moves on, this is a loss for the Panthers, in my opinion.
I wouldn't say it's a loss if that's what he averages. I think it comes down to one thing, whether this trade is a win or a loss, a Stanley Cup. Because I think that the Florida Panthers are ready to win a Stanley Cup. And Shades, I'll ask you this question, and I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. Do you think before the Tkachuk trade, as previously constructed, the Florida Panthers roster, do you think they could have beaten Tampa Bay? Seriously, in a 7-game series. Do you think they could have gotten outside of that Atlantic Division and gotten themselves to an Eastern Conference final before that trade? With that roster, same roster. Because it's 2 consecutive years now. They've got bounced by the Bolts.
Now we're talking about the playoff roster the Panthers had.
Yes. The team that lost.
Here's my reaction to that. If they were able to put the puck in the net on their power play, I would argue yes, because I look at the other side of the East, and let's be honest, if the Rangers power play was not clicking at the rate it was, they were not making the conference final.
We would have been bounced in 5 by Pittsburgh.
Probably. And I look at it this way. If you compare the 2 rosters of the Rangers and the Panthers, I don't even think this is an argument. I thought the Panthers had a significantly deeper lineup on paper.
Deeper forward group, yes. But I think there's an issue in goaltending. There's an issue on defense. But offensively, yeah, I think that there's only one team who could have matched up with the Panthers, and that's the Avs, who went on and won the Cup. So I'll give you that.
Yeah. So to answer your question, definitively,
they didn't even come close either year, Shades. You know, I mean, they didn't even give Tampa a run for their money. It was pretty much pure domination, especially last year. And you know what? I think Bill Zito looked at that and said, look, this ain't going to change. Tampa Bay, no matter how many changes they make in the offseason, no matter how many salary cap hurdles they run into, they are going to dominate the Atlantic Division and the playoffs for years to come here. And there needed to be a significant lineup change. And he brought in a game changer. I mean, is this power play better? Is the Florida Panthers power play better without Mackenzie Weegar, without Jonathan Huberdeau, but you add in Matthew Tkachuk? I think it is. I think it is.
You can make an argument.
You know, go with size and skill, you know. Yeah, I think Matthew Tkachuk brings everything they need. And, you know, I think it was also clearly evident, you know, during that entire playoff run the last 2 years that, yes, Alexander Barkov is the captain of the Florida Panthers. There was a lack of leadership. When you go down 2-0 in a series after losing the first 2 games at home, you need somebody on your team to say, hey, let's step up here and let's figure this out. Because if we don't, we're going to be knocked in 4 games. And there was nobody who did that last year for Florida. You know who would do that? You know who would go out there and kick some ass and send a message to his own team when they are not performing up to expectations? Matthew Tkachuk.
This is true.
And that's what I thought Bill Zito was thinking about when he made this deal. And it's a ton of assets to give up. And he probably got fleeced in this trade, but they would not, in my opinion, have beaten Tampa Bay with the roster constructed around Jonathan Huberdeau and to a lesser extent Mackenzie Weegar if they had not made the trade. But we'll see. We'll see. They could easily go out next year and not make the playoffs because the Atlantic Division got a lot better. So I could eat my words, less than a year from now. So
here's a counterpoint to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If, let's say, you look at the Washington Capitals.
Fair. Yep.
Now, keep that in mind for a sec. This is the first time since I started watching hockey in the 2011-12 season, that the Panthers have actually made the second round. Look at all the times that Washington got bounced in the second round. 2012, 2015, 2016, 2017. They won the cup in 2018 after years of trying, after years of people and reporters saying, is Ovechkin the right guy for this team? Now, granted, Ovechkin got drafted in 2004, so it took them 14 years, but he was the guy, and that team was able to get it done. This is the first time the Panthers have made the second round in, I don't know the exact number of years, but it's been at least 10 years. How do we know that this team was just suffering from a lack of playoff experience? Or how do we not know that?
It could have been that way. It could have been a lack of playoff experience.
Like I said, I'm doing this solely to play devil's advocate, bringing this point up.
Right, and that's fair. And I look at the example that you brought to the table in the Washington Capitals, 2012, when they lost in the second round. They lost to the Rangers, was it? Yeah, and we made it to the Eastern Conference Final, Game 7 against the Devils. So they lost to a team that
Game 6.
One win away, Game 6, still 2 wins away from making it to a Stanley Cup Final. You go to 2015, of course, the 3-1 collapse to the Rangers, who made it again within 1 game of the Stanley Cup Final. 2016, they lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who went on to go win, the first of their 2 straight Stanley Cups. So the Capitals ran into teams that won or were going to win. And it's fair. The Florida Panthers ran into the Tampa Bay Lightning, who won the Stanley Cup in back-to-back years. But I just think, and you know what? The Capitals were dealing with a franchise player in Alexander Ovechkin. It's a lot easier to give up on Jonathan Huberdeau than it is to give up on a core led by Alexander Ovechkin. The Capitals were never trading Ovi, no matter how many times they got bounced in the second round. But for the Panthers, you have a player who's slightly less talented, not really as important to the franchise as Ovechkin was, and you had an opportunity to bring in somebody who can bring a different aspect to your group. I think your devil's advocate point is very fair, and I think there is certainly a case for Bill Zito keeping this group together and relying on inexperience as to why they got knocked out. But you know what? For me, sitting in this chair, I got to credit other general managers noticing when what they are putting out on the ice is just simply not good enough. And you need to make a big change. And sometimes you need to give up a shit ton to make a big, significant change to your lineup. And that's what Bill Zito did here. But I understand your counterpoint. I really do. Because if they had kept the roster together, they very well could have had a monster season and gone on next year and gotten themselves out of the Atlantic Division. And then suddenly they're in the third round and anything can happen. But, we don't live in that.
Actually, probably the most perfect example of a general manager saying we need a change here, Joe Sakic trading Duchene, because that changed the entire outlook on that team, both from an organizational standpoint on paper and on ice product.
Right. And I think it is a good comparison to bring up, right? Because I think when Joe Sakic was making that trade with the Nashville Predator, with the Columbus Blue Jackets trading away Matt Duchene, he didn't really know what direction his franchise was going to go in. Would you have said that Colorado easily could have gone into another rebuild and gotten a lot younger, or they could have built on the pieces that they already have? And Brad Treliving is at that same crossroads right now. And can you imagine if Joe Sakic had decided to keep Matt Duchene, keep all his big time assets? He didn't trade him to Columbus. He traded him to Ottawa and then got the 4th overall pick back, which became Cale Makar. So, things can change quickly in the NHL. And I think that the fact that Brad Treliving gave himself 2 options to go towards, entering this offseason is extremely key, because if he goes and trades away Weegar and trades away Huberdeau at the trade deadline, we could have a similar turnaround as the Colorado Avalanche did when they traded away Matt Duchene and some of their, subsequent stars.
Possibly. And I just had one example, another one in my head that I just lost. But Jesus, this was just absolutely wild yesterday.
Yeah, it was
just
crazy.
So damn good. Oh, now I remember. This Florida team actually reminds me of the 2019. Was it 20? Yeah, the 2019 Columbus team. They kept all their they kept that core together, knowing it was going to be the last run. They went all in at the deadline. Got bounced in 5 in the second round. Florida.
You mean Calgary, right?
No, Columbus.
No, are you comparing Calgary to Columbus or Florida?
Oh, yes, Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, Columbus, they keep their stars. They go all in at the deadline, get bounced in the second round. Florida, who finally, you could look at a team that's just, wow, this team might actually make a deep run this year for the first time in a long time. They make it out.
I think you can argue Calgary did that too, right?
Yeah, and then Calgary shit the bed.
Calgary went out. Yeah, they did shit the bed. But again, they got bounced in 5, right? They went out. Look at all the trades that they made prior to the deadline last year. A lot of people forget they brought in Tyler Toffoli from the Montreal Canadiens. I think he was the most coveted right wing, available at the deadline. They went all in, and they damn well knew that there was a good chance that Johnny Gaudreau would not come back. I mean, of course, I don't think Brad Treliving foresaw Matthew Tkachuk saying, I'm not going to come back either. But, sometimes general managers are able to find the best out of a bad situation. And I think Joe Sakic did that in Colorado. I think that Lou Lamoriello did that in New York, right after John Tavares left for Toronto. Made the Islanders a much better team, led them to 2 straight, Eastern Conference final appearances. And that is what I think is happening with Calgary and Brad Treliving. So, and I think it could happen with the Florida Panthers too. There are parallels that run between these 2 teams that are uncanny. So
yeah, the only minor differences between this Florida team and that year's Columbus team, Huberdeau was a year away from free agency, and Barkov had re-signed prior to this. Now, right. Columbus, they had Panarin and Bobrovsky, basically, and they knew both of them were gone.
Right. And not a lot of people are talking about this either, because I think it was a long time ago that this came out. But if you go back to before Barkov signed that extension, the word out of Florida was that they were looking to shed cap. They were looking to trade away and get as much cap space as possible. And, I think that goes into trading away Weegar, and that goes to trading away Jonathan Huberdeau. I think they want flexibility, because first round picks are great. And, a top 4 right-handed defenseman in Mackenzie Weegar is great. And Jonathan Huberdeau's 115 points is great. But if you bring in Matthew Tkachuk, you have cap flexibility to address the needs that were holding you back the years previous. That's just as valuable in a flat cap era. So. And yeah. Shades, you want to wrap it up by talking about the extension? Because it was a trade and sign, right? Or was it a sign and trade? I think it was going through.
Well, here's the thing. I look at it as a trade and sign because the extension came after the trade. That's just how I look at it.
And this tweet has just come out from David Dwork, and it goes along with our conversation. As the dust settles from the Panthers Flames blockbuster, I'm told Jonathan Huberdeau was not happy about how everything played out. There were some early informal extension talks, but Hubie's camp was waiting for an offer that never came. The next call from Bill Zito was the trade. So there you go. They did not want to lock in Jonathan Huberdeau for a high AAV contract. And you know what, Shades? I said it to you via text the other day, and I'll say it to you again. Would you rather have Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau for 17 million, or would you rather have Tkachuk for 9.8? And my answer is I'd rather have Tkachuk for 9.8, draft picks aside. So what do you think about that tweet that he's crazy?
What this just happened to another player whose name is eluding me. Although
Andrew Kopp
yes,
never got an offer from the Rangers.
which that was a little shocking. But just to
it's a damn shame. Gonna miss Copper.
same. Just to and put this quickly, 8 years times $9.5 million. I don't hate the contract. I actually kind of like it, especially if he does end up hitting that 80 to 85 point range. $9.5 million. That's market value for a point per game player. So I think the contract extension is a good one.
I do too, but I'm going to make a bold prediction right here, and I can't wait to look back at this, 7 years from now. I think by year 5 of this contract, it will be one of the worst contracts in the league. Okay. I think it will be up there with a contract that Florida regrets. But I think by year 5, Florida would have won a Stanley Cup. And that makes this contract worth it, in my opinion, because I bring you back to the 2016 free agent class. The following players signed during that class to all long-term extensions.
What a terrible free agent class that was.
Kyle Oposo signed, Milan Lucic, James Neal. They all signed. And don't they all kind of remind you of Matthew Tkachuk? Who's the last Matthew Tkachuk type player to come through the NHL? Milan Lucic. And they're regretting the contract. And ironically, he plays for Calgary. That's funny. But yeah, big bruising forwards like that, they don't tend to age well, Shades. And I don't think this contract is going to be any different. But I think that this move brings them closer to a cup